Actually, I'm going to tell you about Barefoot in the Park, which is a real fun play, Neil Simon play, and so it's all about Paul and Corey Brader. Paul Brader was played by Carl Bell, and Jen Melton was the one who played Corey. And so Act 1 is all about them moving into the apartment. Corey's are all by herself, getting things set up, and so the first person on the scene is Rich Lewis as Harry Pepper, the AT&T telephone repairman. And so Rich has about 5 minutes of dialogue with Corey, explaining to her, yes, it is a Princess telephone, the one that has a little light on it. And so they were having a conversation, and Corey would go to the door. Their apartment was 5 flights up, and she was like, yes, furniture man? And then she'd come back in, and Rich would tell him more about the telephone, and he said, boy, it's an awful big hike up these 5 flights of stairs. So about that time, I'm down on the ground floor, and I ring the bell, and so Corey hollers down, furniture man? I said, nope, Lord Taylor. And, well, bring up the furniture. So I go up with the 2 packages that, of course, are wedding gifts. So she's awfully disappointed to see me. So I only have 2 minutes of dialogue on the whole play, but it was a lot of fun. And so before I go on, you know what? We had a rehearsal here last week, and I said to Cindy, I said, well, would it be okay if I just went off script? And she said, well, if you need to. And then Harrison said, well, you always do. So if I go off script, it's because the script's in the box, and I may look at my teleprompter here. But anyway, it was a great play. Act 2 is kind of an interesting development. At that point, Mrs. Banks, Corey's mom, moves in, and so that's kind of interesting, because she gets hooked up with Mr. Velasco, who's living on the apartment roof and has to go through their apartment to get to his. So he goes through that was played by David Dunn. And so turns out they go out to dinner, and Mr. Velasco makes his own kamichi appetizer. So he prepared that and said, well, let's go to the Four Winds restaurant in Staten Island, which they did, and Mrs. Banks was not thinking he was such a hot guy, but what the heck. And then it seems as though Mrs. Banks disappeared for an evening and came back the following day, and of course Corey has to know where she was and starts really digging in, and Mrs. Banks was just horrified to be questioned about where she was the night before and who she was with. So that's an interesting part of the play. We get into Act 3, and at this point in time, Corey had purchased or was paying for the apartment that was pretty expensive, and Paul was busy with his legal stuff, and so he's up to his ears with Corey, and she's up to her ears with him, and they're getting ready to get set apart. But it's getting towards the end. I've got to tell you, they moved in this apartment in Manhattan in February, one of the coldest Februarys they ever had, and this nice apartment had a big gaping hole in the skylight. So the final scene of this play is with Paul up there trying to fix a hole in the skylight, and he's all of a sudden going to be sick. And he says, Corey, I'm going to be sick, I'm going to be sick. And she says, oh, no, Paul, you can't be sick, you can't be sick. I'm going to get sick. She says, sing. What can I sing? He says, well, when they went to the Four Winds restaurant in Staten Island, it was one of those European type things where they sang, Shama, Shama, El Shama, Rama, Shama, Shama. So here we have Carl Bell peering down through the skylight in the last scene, singing, Shama, Shama, El Shama, Rama. But the interesting part was that the skylight on our set was 10 feet above the floor, and the entire audience was overwhelmed. How did that happen? How did he get up there, number one? And how did they build the skylight? Well, let me tell you a little bit about our props and our sets. Cindy, do I have any more time or not? The way we always did our sets, we really did a nice job with them. We always like to scrounge things. So we got the small apartment size refrigerator, you might remember that, and small apartment stove at the Olinda landfill. Worked perfectly, and guess what? When the set was struck, we took it back to the landfill, gave it right back to them. But it was just a lot of fun to build sets, and I wanted to just kind of finish up. One of the things that was the nicest thing about our fine arts over the last years is that we always had great sets, and we always looked for the aha moment, and the aha moment in Barefoot in the Park was Carlos looking down, full view of everything, and people wondering how Bell ever got up there. Well, we got him up there. And to finish up my short remembrance here, I could go on. Thank you. Throw the lemons later. We really, I want to say that, kind of on a sad note, that 2 weeks after the show ended, Rich Lewis passed away. And so our founding director, who had been with us and been such a great leader of our program, passed away. And so I just want to say that I know that right now, Rich and Chloe, Kevin and Bob, are looking down, and they're saying to you folks, all of you, 25 years, bravo.